Welcome to TheKillFile, your favorite true crime podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Spears. Each week, we will explore the dark corners of true crime, unsolved mysteries, and murder. Join me as we uncover secrets, investigate evidence, and dive into the chilling details of some of the most fascinating cases. Get ready for a journey into the dark unknown because, in TheKillFile, nothing stays buried forever. Hi there, and welcome to episode 76 of TheKillFile. I am so glad that you guys are back for another story. Before we jump into today's case, a few quick reminders. First off, the Hidden Files are live and over on Patreon if you're interested in checking out new bonus content. It's only $5 and you will get 2 bonus episodes each month, and they will be on subjects revolving around true crime, but a little different than our regular Monday episodes. Things like gangsters, assassinations, famous natural or man-made disasters. So if you're interested in signing up, you can head over to the website, thekillfile.com, and click Hidden Files, or you can go directly to patreon.com/killfile to sign up. There is always an option to just listen to one episode at a time for a few bucks if you prefer. Either way, check them out. Remember, I'm a few weeks ahead on the creation of these main episodes, so the Hidden Files dropped a few weeks ago, and our first episode is all about Fidel Castro and the assassination attempts on his life from our own government. And let me tell you, there are some doozies in there. It was a fun episode, so check that out. Also, please take a second to rate, review, subscribe, follow, whatever you do on your app to get the newest episodes every Monday. And it will help boost the podcast in the lists so others can find us, and it only takes a second. Finally, don't forget, while you are on the website, thekillfile.com, you can find our merch site where you can find some pretty fun true crime merch, as well as merch that just sports the KillFile logo if you prefer. Personally, that is my favorite hoodie. I freaking love the KillFile's logo. I also wanted to take a second to thank all of my listeners. I wouldn't be here doing this if it weren't for you guys there to support me. And as the podcast has gotten better and better, I predict it will continue to grow and shape itself even better. So, for all of you OGs who have been here since the very beginning, that's actually hard to go back and listen to now. Thank you so much. And to our newer listeners, thank you for joining us. And we're so glad to have you. I hope that you'll keep on coming back. Okay. That's it for business. Let's talk about today's case. Today, we are going to be talking about a Colombian serial killer of the very worst kind. Fair warning, today is going to be very dark, very twisted, and a little bit heavy. Think Albert Fish. If you know, you know. We are going to be talking about a man named Luis Garavito, who I personally have never heard of, but stumbled across him as I was covering another case. And keep in mind, I script these as I go, so as I'm typing this out, I have no idea exactly what happens or his victim count or anything until I get into my research, so it could be even worse than I know. Trigger warnings for today are going to be murder, murder of a minor, rape, rape of a minor, brutality, mutilation, and dismemberment. Oof. Here we go. Today's story is going to take us back to the 90s, to the sovereign country of Colombia, where the country was going through a bit of a rough time. At the time, the murders of today's serial killer, Colombia was marked by drug cartels, human rights crises, rapidly escalating government conflicts, and even economic instability. People who lived there at the time as children would say that as they may not have quite understood the turmoil that their country was going through at the time, realizing now that the violence and even car bombings were almost somewhat normal occurrences. The country was dealing with things like violence from governmental entities like guerrillas from the left wing and paramilitaries from the right wing. Assassinations were happening from the 2 major drug cartels at the time, the Medellin cartel, whose top guy was Pablo Escobar, and the even more powerful group called the Cali cartel. Among the cartel violence, there were also disappearances, homicides, and widespread abuse happening everywhere. Honestly, from what I have read and heard about this period of time in Colombia, it seems like it was an absolute horror show and terrifying if you grew up there. With all that was going on in the country, it begs the question if this could be why La Bestia, the beast Luis Garavito, went unchecked for 7 long years of his murderous reign. Let's go back and learn a little bit about this monster and where he came from. Luis Alfredo Garavito was born on January 25th in 1957 in Genova, in the Quintillo region of Bogota, Colombia. Garavito was the oldest child of 7 children born into a poor family, where they lived in an area known for manual labor workers and farmers. The Garavito family fled to a place called Valle del Cauca, which is in western Colombia. This area is known for its production of coffee, sugarcane, and it's called Colombia's salsa capital. They did this, as many other families did, to try and avoid the violence coming from both sides of the political feud. Later on, during trial, because, spoiler alert, thankfully this fuck gets caught, Garavito would testify that he was sexually abused by neighbors on 2 separate occasions when he was in his youth. Garavito would say the reason he didn't tell his parents about the abuse was for one simple fact. His father was physically abusive. It was said that neighbors would confirm or support his sexual abuse allegations. In fact, one source would say that Garavito was systematically abused by the friend of his father in sickening ways, which included being beaten, burned, and raped. This was alleged to have taken place for 2 years. Now, Manuel Antonio Garavito was said to be a violent man who treated the children's mother, Rosa Delia Cubios, horribly. Later, it would be Garavito's testimony that his father was abusive towards the children and mother alike. Some sources said Manuel was also an alcoholic. He would even say that whilst Rosa was pregnant, Manuel was still physically abusive towards her, and Garavito would say that he was the only one who would stand up for her and try to protect her. Garavito was said to have dropped out of school by the time he was 10, which is so young, as he was being bullied and made fun of by classmates, and since Garavito alleged that the teachers did nothing to help, he left and never went back. He would later testify it was unfortunate for him to have been born into a family that was full of constant stress from fighting and arguing. During a later interview, Garavito would say that it was actually his father, Manuel, who had forbidden him from ever having a girlfriend or even friends. Sadly, following the alleged abuse from 2 neighbors or friends of his father, Garavito would go on to repeat the pattern. His first victims, in what would become many, were sadly his younger brothers, where he would sneak into their rooms at night and molest them in their sleep, which is awful, saying that they may not even have known or remembered. Garavito would later say that after the sexual abuse that he also alleged against his own father, that he himself started feeling attracted to boys. Garavito's first victim on record when he was 15 years old, and he was said to have cornered a boy whose age was unknown and fondled him. He would say that it was not his intention to rape the victim, but rather he wanted to, quote, mildly abuse the boy. A University of Alicante researcher who would be one of the people to interview Garavito said that thankfully the boy was able to scream and alert the authorities, and they grabbed Garavito. Now, back at home, it was alleged that his father, Manuel, after finding out about the abuse towards the boy, was mostly pissed that the abuse wasn't towards a girl or a woman. This, again, all according to Garavito. After this incident, his father wanted nothing to do with him, and he kicked him out of the house due to his quote-unquote homosexual behavior. So we're not going to look at the fact that this teenager needs some help and has some sexual issues, clearly. But God forbid he's gay. Oh Lord, what should we do? Alert the church elders. We have a gay boy here. So stupid. Anyways, from then on, Garavito was out on his own, and as one could guess, a teen who was out on their own at 15, having been through what he had and not having great parents, things didn't go great for him. Garavito would confess that he did have a few friends, including a girl that he would meet at church every 8 days or so. Garavito would start to drink heavily, skipping from job to job, starting a life of what was said to be a wanderer. Sources said that he was known to have a violent temper, and this would add to his job loss. And while he did try to have a relationship with women, by his own account, he would find himself not attracted to them, and this was completely frustrating to him. There was one woman that he dated named Claudia, who worked at a salon, and since Garavito had always claimed that he himself had wanted children, he was not put off by the fact that she had a 14-year-old son and a daughter. The problem was they didn't have sex as normal couples do. However, Garavito said he just wanted people to see him with her and said he ended up spending a lot of money on her. He also would say that his co-workers at the time would make fun of him, and at this time he claimed to have been working at bakeries in central supermarkets. The claims of trying to have girlfriends were unable to be confirmed by anyone, although it seems authorities did try. Around the age of 23, Garavito did seem to try and get some help by seeing a psychiatrist. At this time, he was diagnosed as having depression, but was said to have received not really any treatment except for a possible short stint in the hospital, where he failed to mention to any kind of doctor that he was finding himself sexually attracted to minors. This would be the same year that he would start his predatory attacks of sexual abuse and rape on minors. So, during my research into this case, I learned a few things that Garavito was said to be, and this included, of course, a pedophile, but the words hebephilia and ephebophilia were brought up as he was also considered these. Now, I have never personally heard of these words, so I had to look them up and what they meant, and although awful in content, I found the definitions interesting because I didn't know. So, the term pedophilia actually technically refers to someone who finds themselves sexually attracted to a prepubescent child, basically a child under the age of 11-ish. Hebephilia refers to someone who finds himself sexually attracted to pubescent children, which are roughly the ages of 11 through 14-ish, which obviously leaves the term ephebophilia, which is someone who finds himself sexually attracted to a teenager, somewhere between 15 or 16, maybe sometimes slightly older, which of course is still under the age of consent. I had no idea that there were different terms and categories for people that are attracted to children for whatever fucking reason. Still gross, still sick, just interesting as far as terms go. So I guess Garavito would start at this point to lure boys between the ages of 6 and 16 to somewhere more remote or isolated to assault his victims. One source would quote him as saying that he was in AA at the time and was still working. However, he would claim that he would desire many of the younger boys that he would see at the store, admittedly wanting to, quote, be with the minor, to caress him, to rape him, end quote. He said during his 2-hour lunch break that he would go to a neighboring town where he claimed there was access to many minors. Sources said that Garavito would lure them with different promises like either food, which is fucking heartbreaking, or money, and once he had them alone, he would sadly rape the boys. However, he hadn't started killing yet. He admittedly would tell some of the boys that he had some calves that needed help and he would offer to pay them between 500 to 1,000 pesos for the help. Apparently, Garavito would often, before raping the boys, either burn them or bite them, saying that he would actually pull out one of his teeth in order to bite them. He would allege that when he was 15 years old, his father knocked out his right incisor. He would confess, quote, I felt a sense of relief. I felt good doing this to children. I would bite their nipples, slash their arms, and burn them on the sides of their buttocks. End quote. Oh, I hate him. I hate him. What a sick motherfucker. He gained pleasure doing these things to poor kids. I couldn't help but wonder if he would have been this way regardless of what happened as a child. Like, was he born that way or predisposed to being this way, or was it pure fact that he had a horrific childhood where he himself was raped and beaten? Did it cross like some wires where pain for the other person meant pleasure for the rapist? I mean, it's definitely not a coincidence that he needed to inflict pain in order to get his jollies off, and that is what was done to him as a child. And I also couldn't help but wonder what the burning or the biting was meant to be. Was it just a sadistic thing, or was that maybe done to him as a child as he was being raped by the two friends or neighbors of his father, or his father, who also allegedly molested him? These experiences, unfortunately, is what led Garavito to learning his lust and love of sodomy. In fact, he would quickly learn that the more pain he inflicted upon his victims, the better the experience was for him sexually. And this is why he would torture his victims. So I will say right now that luckily for us, the sheer volume of victims in this case will lead us to not having to delve into every single victim by any means. We will listen to a few tales of Garavito's own confessions, which most likely won't be pleasant, a few survivors, and then we will talk about what his usual murders and attacks would look like. But since this is about children, I wanted to make sure everyone knows right out the gate, we're not going to be going through all of the victims' stories and what happened to them. I will also do my best to break up the horrificness with other stuff, as I usually try to do, so it's not quite as heavy on all of us while we can still learn about these monsters. Okay, so let's talk about what Garavito said about his very first murder he committed. Garavito in later interviews would say that his first murder would take place in 1992, making him around the age of 36 years old. As he had been carrying on with the abuse and rapes of his poor victims, it was growing clear to La Bestia that this would not be enough to sustain the hunger he felt within. Sources said that Garavito desperately searched for answers in the Bible and would become an extremist in his religion. He would later allege that he would quote-unquote wake up in the mornings after the rape and upon remembering what he did the night before, cry about his disgustingness. He allegedly wanted redemption and forgiveness for the things he considered sins. But let's be honest, these aren't sins. These are criminal, abusive, horrific acts against children. And when people truly want forgiveness and redemption, they stop their fucking actions and search for help. So I, for one, think he's full of shit. How can you regret what you're doing yet find so much pleasure in it? Bullshit. Garavito was said to have not only at least attacked one boy a month, but he also wrote things down in a journal of sorts for over 8 years before he was caught. Some of what he wrote was scripture, as he would be in quote-unquote religious trances, trying to find peace for his soul, in which he would rest easily on the words over and over again from his God, that there is forgiveness for all of the sins that one commits. I cannot stand people who hide their bullshit behind religion. There are people who live on the words of the Bible, and this can help them to become better people. And then there are people like this, who pretend to, but do whatever the fuck they want, and they believe that they will be forgiven, so who cares what I do, right? This is my problem with religion. Why is it a do whatever you want pass and take no responsibility? Just believe in me. That's bullshit. Own your shit. Anyways, on the day of the first murder, Garavito was said, according to his own confessions, that he was at a bar when he would become quote-unquote obsessed with a boy who had just simply walked by him. He would then follow the boy like a creep and eventually trick the poor boy into going into the woods with him, this being at night. He would proceed with what now had become a routine of rape against the boys, where he would allege that, in his mind, he would be put right back into his own childhood. He would allege that the painful memories would end up breaking him, where he was engulfed in pure rage, and sadly, Garavito would stab the boy named Juan Carlos while he was sodomizing the poor child. Thus, the first murder was complete and would set forth a pattern of murder, victimization, and the unleashing of a beast that no one could seem to find. One of the sources that I used for this case was very interesting, but it was a theory written up by 4 different people about Luis Garavito in a psychological aspect, comparing psychiatrists and doctors' teachings about the mind and behavioral science, seemingly, and comparing that to Garavito's life and the interviews from a book that I will link in the show notes, and I can't give you the title because it will give something away. But basically, they took the book where Garavito speaks about his life, and they describe his personality structure, where they suggest in the research that Garavito is neurotic and psychopathic, which, of course, now we use ASPD as the diagnosis for that, antisocial personality disorder. Which, while we're on the subject, why did they change that diagnosis? I feel like maybe it was because, there's a stigma that comes along with psychopathy, but I think that we should call a spade a spade. Someone who has psychopathic traits, they're not just antisocial. So, what the fuck? There is a lot to that diagnosis that is seemingly more sugar-coated by using ASPD as the diagnosis, but whatever. The reason that I brought up their research, and I will link the authors and everything in the show notes, was because during their explanation, they speak to the fact that Garavito was apparently a big fan of Hitler, saying that he wanted to be like him and admired him the way that he had gained his own power and became respected. Garavito would later say he really wanted to be on TV and in the press and for everyone to talk about him, saying that there were people he really wanted to take revenge on, and even going as far as saying that he liked concentration camps. Despicable, truly. But I couldn't help but wonder if this stemmed from maybe feeling powerless as a child when he was being abused and or raped. I mean, what the fuck do I know here? But I can imagine that would make you desire power, right? Okay, this next part is going to be gnarly as we talk about his usual MO and what he usually did to his victims. So, brace yourself. La Bestia was known to sometimes pose as a priest, because of course he did, and this would help him gain the trust of the children he wanted to lure away. If not a priest, then he would sometimes pose as a homeless man, a monk, a street vendor, someone with a disability, or even someone he would pretend to be as a representative of a made-up foundation for children or the elderly so he could access schools. Once he was able to lure his victims away, he would usually bind them or tie them up, rape them while torturing them, and he would eventually kill them. Ugh, this next part is going to be very hard to say. I'm so sorry. Some of the awful things he did as torture was to sometimes cut the organs out of the victims while they were still alive, and then he would slit their throats. Once the victim was deceased, sometimes he would cut off their fingers or toes as part of the mutilation, and to make it seem as if some local satanic cult were doing the killings. Other sources would say that he would cut the genitalia off of his victims. Some sources would say that not only did La Bestia slit the children's throat, but that he would also decapitate them at times. Awful, awful, awful. Fuck. So this is how things would go for Garavito, and as far as the victims, he would leave the bodies in his wake in 60 different locations across Colombia. The bodies were usually found with signs of being bound and mutilated. It was said that La Bestia drank heavily prior to the attacks in many cases, but I wondered how that could be true because he would say that he would take his lunch break sometimes to attack his victims. Garavito's victim profile was one that made it maybe easier for him to find himself victims. These would be the sons of street vendors or people who were of poorer classes, and some of them just lived on the streets, which is awful. A person named William Trujillo would come out with his story about the time that he himself had been attacked by the monster or the beast Garavito. William was one of the only survivors who had crossed paths with La Bestia, most likely because he encountered him before he started his murderous rampage. When William was 9 years old, he saw some other kids using a box to slide down a hill, and he wanted to play as well. Right before he was about to go down the hill, Garavito snatched the boy by his neck, and he bear hugged him from behind so that William could not move. William would say this is when Garavito showed him that he had a machete on him, and would tell him that if he made any sound or if he screamed, he would kill him. William would recount the incident in a painful recollection that I'm not going to delve into because I don't think that we need all of the details, but surely you can imagine what it would be like for this young boy to be raped and assaulted. He went through hell for about 12 hours before Garavito finally released the boy. William would say that each and every minute that trickled by felt like an eternity for him. Eventually, when he was released, he took what strength he had left and ran until he was able to find his mother and stepfather, who coincidentally were already out looking for him. William would then say that after Garavito was arrested and put in prison, he was sending letters to where the monster was being kept, and he was requesting that he get to have a face-to-face meeting with him. William would say that he wanted the chance to tell this sicko, before he could be released, yeah, we'll get to that even though he was raped and abused by him as a child, he didn't follow in those footsteps, and that he was able to break the cycle. He also wanted his attacker to know that he himself was smarter than the beast, and that he was a good person. Because La Bestia moved around constantly, it made him very hard for the authorities to track. The media, mostly newspapers at this point, were printing stories of the bodies being found in many different areas. It was said that in some sources that groups of kinds of like neighborhood watches or brigades were going out in hopes of finding and confronting this killer, but sadly, they would find another body. The headline after this finding was, quote, "Another child, brutal ceremony of rape and death." Unfortunately for Garavito, he was just like all of the rest of the serial killers. In fact, he wanted to keep some trinket, some possession, as a reminder of the time he committed the most heinous acts that one could commit on a child: hotel bills, bus tickets, and of course, his journal. In his confessions, Garavito would tell the tale of one boy in particular who was 12 years old and was wandering the streets, seemingly lost. When Garavito engaged him in conversation, the boy said that he was from Bogota and said he accidentally fell asleep while riding the bus and he didn't know where he was because he had missed his own stop. Garavito would then say he was able to convince the boy to leave with him, going to the corner store where he would buy the minor some alcohol, and the two would walk along the railroad tracks, allegedly looking for some specific exit towards the highway. I'm assuming just to try to get the boy back home. When they reached an area that was said to be across from a fish farm, whatever that is, there was a liquor store, so La Bestia went inside and bought the boy some more of the alcohol he liked. He then lured and walked the boy to an area past a warehouse called Idime. When they crossed the stream and then entered a ditch, this is where he would tie the boy up, strip him down, but before anything happened, Garavito said, all of a sudden there was a horrific smell. Garavito would confess as he was looking around to see what it was, he noticed a skull. Yeah, it was actually the remains of some of the other boys that he had actually fucking lured to the same spot to do the same thing to. He would say that he was in shock and claimed that when the boy asked him to let him go, he untied him. Garavito then said that the boy grabbed his knife and lunged at him, cutting his hand, I think it was around his thumb, pretty severely. It was actually enough to slice the tendons, so he had issues for life with it, which good. He would then say that this made him decide to kill the boy, which I call bullshit on. He probably would have killed the boy either way, in my opinion. There's no way that he untied the boy because they ran into the remains of another child that he had lured there. When you hear the numbers that this sick fuck got to, there's no way that it was because it shocked him. Again, this is just my conjecture, but I couldn't help but wonder if the boy was actually able to wiggle out of being tied up and got the knife of his own volition and cut his hand all on his own. But maybe Garavito didn't want to admit it? I don't know. But sadly, he would end up killing the poor child. After one particular murder where he ended up killing a local coffee boy that was well known and well liked, who actually recognized La Bestia as an air freshener salesman that was at his school a while back, Garavito would say that afterwards, as he was heading back to the village that he was staying in, he allegedly heard a voice talking to him saying, quote, "You're a wretch. You're worthless." And after hearing this, he walked back to the sugarcane field in which he had just murdered the coffee boy. Garavito would allege that when he saw what he did, he knelt down and repented. And then, of course, he buried the knife that he had in his hand. This is my point when it comes to people who use religion to forgive themselves for horrific shit they do. He repented, so he actually believes that someone like him would go to heaven if there really was one. Bullshit. You don't get to forgive yourself and make everything go away like that, you sick fuck. He claimed that after this murder, he read the Bible all night and decided to quit drinking and focus solely on his work. But guess what? People like this, they don't change, and it wouldn't take long before he went right back to the piece of shit he always was. Except this time, he turned to the devil, alleging that he made a pact with Satan and even practiced satanic rituals with some of the children he murdered. Just think about that for a minute. Let's talk about how this disgusting pig was finally caught. Unfortunately, it was not due to a whole lot of police work, as it was because he was caught in the action by a citizen. Backing up just a little, when the authorities finally discovered some of the bodies that would lead to his identity, the police had found specific skeletal remains, but at first they thought these children to have been victims to a satanic cult. In late 1997, the bodies of 3 children who were bound naked and their throats were slit were all found together. As the authorities started to investigate this area, they would find a clue. Not far from what was said to be a makeshift grave, they would find a note that had been handwritten, and on it was said to be the address of a girlfriend of Garavito. Upon arrival, they searched the premises and the room that he was staying in, but he was gone, leaving behind a few bags of his belongings, though. Because the crimes were said to be so heinous in particular, the authorities then created a special task force of sorts to help find and capture Garavito. It would take them 2 years to finally find him because of the fact that he wore many disguises, used aliases, and moved a lot. They couldn't get ahead of him. So remember that the crime spree of murder started in 92. They didn't really start putting some of these bodies together as being found, for one, because he would bury them, but also being the same person until 1997. So for 5 years, it was just unchecked. He had quite a few nicknames in the media as well, including, as mentioned before, La Bestia, or the Beast, El Monje, or the Monk, El Monstruo de Genova, or the Monster of Genova, El Loco, or the Crazy, and many more. On April 22nd of 1999, a homeless man would end up being the savior of a young boy's life, as well as the reason that La Bestia was caught. Garavito had kidnapped the child and was attempting to assault or rape him when the boy started screaming, which is what alerted the homeless man, although one source said it was another kid, so I was wondering if maybe it was like a teenager. Anyways, the homeless person alerted the authorities, but while he was waiting for them to get there, he started pelting Garavito with rocks. Good for him. El Loco fled, but just a few hours later, he was captured. After his capture during interrogation, at first Garavito tried to deny his crimes, but besides the mounting evidence against him through police work, there was the kicker that sealed his fate, his own journal, which would lead Garavito to confessing to killing at least 140 children. Yeah, 140, but there would end up being more. I was shocked when I read that number. It's actually what led me to researching this case because I needed to know how someone like this went unchecked for so long and how he was able to do this to so many children. Not even adults, fucking children. Holy shit, it is absolutely horrific. He also confessed to the rapes of 200 children because remember, at first he was not killing them. And some sources would say that he eventually confessed to the murders of over 192 children. The way that this man would confess to these crimes and then pretend to be so upset about them was enough to make my stomach sick. He would say things like, quote, "He screamed, so I killed him. I don't remember what wounds I inflicted. I used a knife. I cut off his head and I had sex with him." End quote. And this is as he's recanting the abhorrent details of the crimes. It just kept going with another boy, another boy, another boy. Things like there were 11 in 1993. I killed another one in Tulua, and then there were like 4 or 5 in the sugarcane fields that he left them in. When talking about the year of 1994 alone, he said he killed children whose names were on this list on a piece of paper, and as he handed it to police, there were 27 names listed. After the skeletal remains of 33 children had been found in different parts of just one city, the DA realized these were awfully similar in MO and appearance to his victims. Garavito would confess that he was able to lure many of the children in the same ways. He would stand in front of parks, bus stations, schools, and in hand he would have money or candy. After committing his crimes, he would clip out the newspaper articles and keep them about his stories. I'm sorry, but what part of this story makes us believe that this man is repentive? No fucking way, I say. He seems more like the usual psychopath who feels nothing towards his victims or crimes or people affected, but rather he might put on like the typical show that psychopaths do, thinking that they're convincing us what they actually feel, but in reality, they are just mimicking or copying what they see empathetic people exhibiting. When talking about the decapitation of the children, Garavito would be asked why he did that. He would say he wasn't sure, but maybe it was so that the children would die more easily, as if trying to put them out of their misery made anything that he did better. That also couldn't be true because he cut their organs out, or off, meaning genitals, while they were still alive. He is so full of shit. During his confessions, he would also confess to some murders in Venezuela, Ecuador. Who knows the actual number of victims this fucker had? During part of his confessions, he would cry and tell the investigators, quote, "Don't look at me like that. I'm no worse than Carlos Costano. Don't look at me like that." End quote. I had to look up who that was, and he is truly a fucking psychopath if he believes that he is not worse than this guy. Carlos Costano was like a paramilitary leader who was far right-winged, who doesn't seem like a great guy, but he was not a child rapist, torturer, and murderer by any means. So fuck right off with that shit. Garavito would say, quote, "I don't want you to look at me like I'm a monster. I'm a human being." End quote. During his trial, there wasn't much of a defense for them to put on except for his past abuse and rapes as a child. And look, it's okay to feel bad. This is just my opinion. For the children version of these people, like, yeah, what he went through was not okay, and it was horrific in itself, and probably led to his urges and sexual preferences. But when you become an adult, and I don't even mean like legally at 18, but when your frontal lobe is done developing at 24, that's when you should be able to make choices correctly. Remember, this fucker didn't start killing until he was in like his mid-30s, so there's absolutely no excuse. I mean, yeah, he sought help, but he left out the parts of himself where he was finding himself aroused by children or even had committed sodomy and rape upon young boys. He could have went and got help and had been honest and kept himself from doing that. I think if someone truly knows that they can't keep themselves from doing something horrific and actually feel that it's horrific, then you go to a hospital or you go to prison or, fuck, sorry, but you can commit suicide if you really had a conscience. You don't do it over and over more than 200 times. I'm sorry, but you don't. Garavito would be found guilty of his heinous crimes and sentenced on December 13th, 1995 to a total of 1,853 years in prison. But here's the kicker. Again, and we've heard this before, the Colombian Constitution does not allow for the death penalty, and it doesn't allow the sentences to be consecutive. They have to be concurrent, which means the absolute maximum sentence Luis Garavito could get was 30 years. And then it was reduced to 22 years because he pled guilty. Yeah, what the fuck, you guys? Oh my god. During his trial, Garavito would ask for forgiveness. And when the prosecutor asked why he wanted forgiveness, he would say that he was asking forgiveness from God, from many people, from the justice system and from society, saying that something inside him made him do these things and it was unintentional. He again claimed to be on God's path now while he was in prison. What's that old saying? There are no atheists on death row. Except they don't have death row. There's been much public outcry as far as his sentencing goes because so many wanted the death penalty and believe that he deserves it. The families and loved ones of the victims, which has to be like thousands of people, right, have called for the Colombian laws to be changed because they're bullshit. This is when I looked it up, and it seems like Colombia still doesn't have the death penalty. Garavito asserts that he has no sexual perversions and is not a homosexual, and yet he couldn't have sex with women, only children, and only boys. Figure that one out. He, of course, would blame the alcohol, saying it changed him. After sentencing, Garavito was going to be eligible for parole in 2023 and was willing to do some interviews while he waited in prison. One was with a man named John Sistiaga, which I will link in the notes, and I had to just put the closed captions on to translate it for me. But at one point, Garavito says, quote, "I'm a human being, just like anyone else, with flaws, but I don't consider myself dangerous." End quote. Holy shit, this dude is absolutely delusional. Now, this part was interesting because remember, I scripted out live, so I have no idea about like interviews that, psychiatrists might do or what they have to say about it. And I think that our thoughts on this guy was probably right on the mark. A forensic biologist named Dr. Mark Benecke sat down and spoke to Luis Garavito and had some interesting insights. The article that was put out on home.benecke.com about the interview was made in 2020. One of the first things that I noticed is where he would call the monster a, quote, crystalline psychopath, end quote, which kind of made me laugh. Yeah. He would also say he could tell that Luis Garavito was faking a little bit because he knew psychopathic people so well, and he could tell pretty quick that it was all an act. The doctor would say that when he would sit down to talk, there would be brought in coffee, to which Garavito would sometimes switch the mugs around, and the doctor remarked thinking like maybe it was a nice gesture, like culturally or something. But when he asked him why he was doing this, Garavito, turned out, was afraid that he was being poisoned. But it didn't seem to occur to him that the doctor could be poisoned if it was true, which the doctor said is typical for a psychopath. He would further state that Garavito was sobbing once at a picture, but the moment that more coffee was being brought in, he stopped abruptly, and the doctor knew that he was full of shit and that it was fake. The doctor would also say that Garavito was friendly, soft-spoken, and he threw in that many psychopathic people are this way, and that Garavito is willing to be open and honest if you don't judge him. It freaked me out when he said that they are friendly and soft-spoken, and that this behavior is normal for psychopaths. That's scary. Finally, when asked what may have driven Garavito to do all of the awful shit that he did, the doctor would say both a mixture of sexual abuse that he was victim to and the early violence in his childhood. Now, this is interesting because we were kind of wondering, like, is it because he was born this way? Is it because of the things that happened to him? What's going on? Dr. Benecke thinks that their father, being an alcoholic, affected them as well. The doctor believes, saying this affects them not just after they're born, but actually affects them as a fetus, being high stress, and that maybe even his mother had a substance abuse problem. And because of these reasons, the doctor felt that there were genetic influences at play, which he says always have some sort of role. Everything put together, he believes, created this antisocial narcissist, aka psychopath, he stated. Dr. Benecke believes that Garavito actually did like children in his heart and felt that he could relate to them, but of course he abused and killed them. He believes that there were at least 300 children and maybe even some adult victims. Other authorities believe that there could actually be 400 victims. While serving his sentence in prison, Garavito would develop severe eye cancer, which led him to being very tired, and he had to have blood transfusions daily. Good. He was in the medical unit inside the prison, and he would make bracelets and necklaces while reading the Bible. If he were to get out on parole, which all signs pointed to, like he was going to in 2023, he had plans to enter politics or ministry to help abused children. What in the actual fuck? No fucking way. He was actually diagnosed with ASPD at some point and was still set to possibly get out in 2023 or sometime soon after. In a twist of fate, Luis Garavito would die in prison on October 12, 2023, at the age of 66. And that, my friends, is the story of Luis Garavito La Bestia El Loco, the monster who raped, tortured, and killed upwards of 300 children over the span of just 7 years. Holy shit, right? Oh my God, my heart sank when I read that he could have gotten out on parole in Colombia. What the fuck is up with the judicial system in Colombia? I read that they have beliefs that human life is more important than like the crimes or whatever, but I couldn't help but wonder if this is due to such strong religious beliefs there. Am I wrong? If anyone out there knows, please share your info on the TheKillFile social posts because I gotta know why they still don't have the death penalty. Or, in the very least, why they wouldn't let this sick fuck rot in jail for all eternity. Life without parole, if you don't believe or are against the death penalty, is still a great fucking option. In my opinion, there are just some people who deserve to be fucking put down, and this sicko is one of them. If anyone is deserving of dying publicly, it's this bastard. Over 200 children. Oh my God. It's so easy to just put the thought of that out of your mind and think of this as a story, but when you read details of what he did, as I had to, unfortunately, but I spared you all, because I didn't know if anyone really needs to know the details. Of course, if you're weirdly interested, no judgment. You can read all of the sad details in the links if you just need to know the horrificness. But when you see pictures, names, or stories of these kids, it's just a giant blow to your mind that these poor kids endured some of the worst things on earth that a person can go through, in my opinion. They were just babies. I think the age span was 8 to 16, so just babies, really, the poor things. I'm so glad this asshole is dead. Can you imagine being the families of these children? How do you not take a fucking gun to his face in court? If I didn't have other kids to be there for, I would absolutely be okay with spending my life in prison or dying for killing the sick fuck who killed my baby, and I wouldn't feel bad about it for a second. I wish that they could have caught him sooner. I also hope the families are able to live the best that they can, which is probably not well after these kinds of losses. I feel so bad for them. No one deserves that. Well, I hope I didn't ruin your day with this sick, twisted tale of an individual who fit the cookie-cutter definition of pedophile and psychopath. The worst of the worst, for sure. Come on back next week when we will cover another case here on the TheKillFile where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today. A few quick reminders before you go. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on your platform. It will help the podcast grow and other true crime lovers to find us. Also, check out the website, thekillfile.com, where you can suggest a case, find our merch shop, and submit a listener file. Follow the TheKillFile on your favorite social media platforms. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and TikTok. Of course, you can always subscribe on YouTube as well. Find all of the links for the socials on the website. Come back on Mondays wherever you get your podcast fix when we will cover another case on the TheKillFile where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye.